On Saturday, June 25th, 1530, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Dr. Christian Bayer walked toward the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, and began reading the Augsburg Confession in a loud and distinct voice. Through the open windows, a hushed crowd outside in the courtyard hung on his every word, as did the 200 or so people gathered in the hall. Beside Dr. Bayer stood Dr. Gregory Bruck, holding a copy of the Augsburg Confession in Latin. The German princes around them stood up to indicate their support for the confession. The emperor motioned for them to sit down. When Dr. Bayer finished reading, Dr. Bruck took the German copy of the confession with him, handed both copies to the emperor, and said, "Most gracious emperor, this is a confession that will even prevail against the gates of hell, with the grace and help of God." Thus was the Augsburg Confession presented as a unique confession of the truth of God's Word, distinct from Romanism on the one hand, and Reformed, Anabaptists, and Radicals on the other. June 25th, 1530 is a date every bit as important for Lutherans as is the more familiar date of October 31st, 1517, the day on which Luther posted his 95 Theses. So how did we get here? How did we get to this point where they are making their confession before Charles V? Nothing ever happens in a vacuum, and that is certainly the case with the history of the Reformation. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of a historical background before we actually start into the meat of the Augsburg Confession. So, 9 years earlier, 9 years prior to the Augsburg Confession being presented, in April of 1521, there was an imperial meeting, or diet, as it is called, in the city of Worms. There, Charles had listened to Martin Luther as he refused to recant his teachings, saying, "I cannot and I will not recant. Here I stand, I can do no other. God help me. Amen." Now, in the wake of that diet, Martin Luther was declared a criminal, an outlaw, and a heretic, and he was excommunicated and sentenced to death. In fact, anybody could basically kill Martin Luther with absolute impunity, no repercussions. In fact, that's really what the emperor wanted. But he couldn't stop the fire, because by 1526, the Reformation had spread to the point that during an imperial meeting in the city of Speyer, the Lutheran princes forced through a resolution that gave each of them the right to arrange religious matters in their respective territories in any way that he felt best. Think of it as proto-religious freedom, something along those lines. But the idea was to at least give them a little bit of a buffer until the emperor was able to have the Pope issue a general council for the church, which would eventually come in the form of the Council of Trent. But so from 1526 to 1529, little changed in the Holy Roman Empire, except in the German territories. Northern Germany, basically almost all of it, became Lutheran, along with many cities in southern Germany. But then, nothing good ever lasts on this side of eternity. Unfortunately, at the Second Imperial Meeting at Speyer, which was in 1529, the princes who were loyal to Rome reversed the decision that was made 3 years earlier, saying that princes cannot dictate what their territories will be in terms of their religion. The princes who were loyal to the Lutheran Reformation, and those who were loyal to the reforming movements that had started kind of cropping up, the Anabaptists, the Zwinglians, sort of in that realm, they fiercely protested this. They issued a formal protestio You can hear the word protest in there. And that is where we Lutherans kind of get lumped in with all of the other reformers in being labeled Protestants. For the record, strictly speaking, we Lutherans have less to do with other Protestants than we do, frankly, with Rome. Other Protestants, the Radical Reformation, tended to take things really far. And Luther didn't want that. We don't want that. But the name has stuck with us ever since. So you've got these two factions kind of warring in the German lands, and that's a big problem. Because for Charles, he can't allow such discontent and division to remain in his lands, especially when you consider what was going on in the grander scheme of things. Charles couldn't afford civil unrest. In fact, he couldn't afford any kind of unrest because he had an outside enemy, the Turks. Coming out of the Ottoman Empire, what would be the Ottoman Empire, they were literally at the eastern gates of his empire. They were at the gates of Vienna. And he could not face them without having unity. He needed that unity so that they could face this threat. And he hoped that he could kind of find some sweet balance between being kind and cajoling, and probably finally, ultimately, through threats, that he could stop the Lutheran movement and that he could restore Romanism throughout the entire Roman Empire. But things did not go the way Charles had hoped. It's probably hard to believe this, but the Lutherans did not take very kindly to that second Diet at Speyer. In fact, one of the Lutheran princes, Philip of Hesse, he actually sought to create a political federation for the mutual defense of all of those who wanted to stand against Rome, who wanted to stand against Charles's edict. So they created this federation, him and Jakob Sturm. They united Saxony and Hesse with certain other southern German cities, the evangelical cities, kind of revolved around Ulm and Strasbourg and Nuremberg. Those were sort of the high points, the main cities where this all happened. But at the Second Diet of Speyer in April of 1529, they met together and they made a secret agreement. But they knew that they couldn't have a unified front, much like Charles. They couldn't have a unified front against Rome and against Charles unless they themselves were united. Because this was not explicitly Lutheran princes. These were also princes who followed the other reformers as well. And they realized that they had to have unity as well. And in fact, he was wanting to include the Swiss in this, which would eventually down the way also include John Calvin. There's not a whole lot of overlap between Luther and Calvin, but there's some. But in any case, they needed unity, which is a big problem for us as Lutherans, because we hear unity for the sake of something other than scriptural purity, doctrinal unity, and that's a big, big problem. Philip Melanchthon, one of the authors of the Augsburg Confession, actually thought this was a horrendous idea. And Luther also opposed this federation wholeheartedly. And in fact, in response to this, Luther and some others actually presented the Schwabach Articles. And they were presented between July 25th and September 14th of 1529, that same year as the Second Diet of Speyer, in order to address this, because they knew if we're going to have political unity, first and foremost, above all, we need to have doctrinal purity. That following year, between the Diet at Speyer and the actual presentation of the Augsburg Confession, which actually was about a year, that was filled with a lot of stuff going on. You had not only the Marburg Colloquy, wherein you had the infamous fight, not coming to fisticuffs or anything, but the actual debate between Ulrich Zwingli and Martin Luther, where Luther was willing to make concessions on almost everything, on almost every point of doctrine, where they're like, yeah, okay, we can sort of see that. The single place where they couldn't was with the Lord's Supper. And that's where you had Luther hear tell that he actually like carved into the table is means is in German. And at the end, he and Zwingli just had to part ways and just say, you know what, we're just two different spirits. We'll just let our Lord differentiate, and we'll let him decide and judge between us when the end of days comes. So you had the Marburg Colloquy, and out of that came the Marburg Articles. So you had that, the Marburg Articles, along with the Schwabach Articles, that sort of formed the foundation of the writing of the Augsburg Confession. But you also had something else in there. You also had what were known as the Torgau Articles. You had the Elector of Saxony, John the Steadfast. At first, he refused to attend any meeting at Augsburg, but frankly, Emperor Charles encouraged him and urged him to do so, since he was inviting everybody to share their opinions and their thoughts and their notions. The Elector John asked that the Wittenberg theologians, led by Luther, would prepare a statement of confession. So Luther, Melanchthon, Justus Jonas, and Johann Buchenhagen, I don't know if you can possibly have a more German name than that, they met at Torgau, and they got to work immediately. And their document was given to the Elector John at the Torgau Castle in March of 1530, just a month before the Diet at Augsburg. And they became known as the Torgau Articles. And the problem is, some issues came up with that. I don't think you can have enough drama in history. And this entire affair, this last push right before Augsburg, really kind of defines it. You had the Lutheran princes and the Elector John the Steadfast refusing to kneel to receive a special blessing from the Pope when Charles and his royal procession came into the city. They refused to kneel. It was quite dramatic. But then later on, that same evening, the Lutheran princes met with Charles and his brother Ferdinand, who was the King of Austria, and they ordered them to not do any Lutheran preaching while they were in the city or anything like that. They commanded them to march in the Corpus Christi procession that was going to be the following day. And then you have this incredible figure, George the Margrave of Brandenburg, who stood up and spoke for the Lutherans.
Before I let anyone take from me the word of God and ask me to deny my belief, I will kneel and let him strike off my head.
The emperor, clearly taken aback by George's boldness, sputtered in broken German, because that wasn't his first language, "Not cut off head, dear prince, not cut off head." Oh, the things that history records for us. The plan was to present the Torgau Articles before the assembly, but that had to be scrapped when it was found out that a very lengthy, slanderous attack on Luther had been prepared by John Eck, Luther's old nemesis from way back when. At Leipzig in 1529, it was actually Eck who tried to brand Luther as a heretic at that time. But now, he had secretly written a lengthy attack on Luther and all his followers in a book that was entitled 404 Articles for the Diet in Augsburg. It included quotations from Luther's writings, as well as those from the other Protestant reformers, and suffice it to say, it was very inaccurate. It was very slanderous. It tried to equate the Lutherans with the teachings of Zwingli, which, if you are a Lutheran, you understand that is repugnant. Absolutely repugnant. But his goal was to identify Lutheranism with the most extreme reformers, the Anabaptists. But that's why they took care and went back to the drawing board and drafted up the Augsburg Confession. because this was meant to be a new statement of faith, specifically designed to distance themselves from the Anabaptists, the Zwinglians, and others. No, we are distinct. And they wanted to make sure that they knew that we are distinct. So they wrote, it was intentionally crafted to present a very gentle and peaceful response to the emperor. They could have been just gone and flown off the handle, but that's not what they wanted to do. Wise as serpents, innocent as doves. That is what they were going for. And they intended only to speak for Saxony, but various German leaders read this document and they said they too wanted to sign on to it and make it their confession. So, on April 25th, 1530, these courageous Lutheran laymen confessed their faith and told the emperor and the Roman Church what they believed, taught, and confessed. And they did so with the utmost respect, but boldness. All right, that's enough of a history lesson. Why don't we actually get into the meat of this?
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
Because that's what you're here for, right? You're here on Firehose to hear our confessions and sort of hear a little bit of commentary on them. I know that the past several weeks have been talking about our creeds and everything that goes along with them, the historical background, what they're speaking against, but now we're getting into the writings of the Reformers themselves. These are the writings that really encapsulate us as Lutherans. Now, for the record, the Augsburg Confession version that we're going to be using is known as the UAC, the Unaltered Augsburg Confession. I say that because later on in his life, Philip Melanchthon got a little squishy.
I shall call him Squishy, and he shall be mine, and he shall be my Squishy.
He got a little squishy, and he desired more doctrinal unity through appeasement. And it didn't work. He actually went back and he altered the Augsburg Confession, which actually is still confessed this day in several, kind way to say it is, heterodox church bodies. Not all of them Lutheran, even. So we're going to be using the unaltered version of this, the one that they originally wrote kind of last minute before they actually went and presented before the emperor. Now I'm going to read the preface. This is Melanchthon, and you're going to hear how flowery his language is, how complimentary he is in his language. It's really kind of magnificent because there's no way that Charles is sitting there listening to this and he's like, I'm just waiting for the shoe to drop, and it never does, because it's almost saccharine in how sweet they're being to Charles. They're so flattering. So, this is the preface to the Augsburg Confession. To Emperor Charles V, Most invincible Emperor, Caesar Augustus, most clement Lord, your Imperial Majesty has summoned a meeting of the Empire here at Augsburg to consider taking action against the Turk, discussing how best to stand effectively against his fury and attacks by means of military force. The Turk is the most atrocious and ancient hereditary enemy of the Christian name and religion. This meeting is also to consider disagreements in our holy religion, the Christian faith, by hearing everyone's opinions and judgments in each other's presence. They are to be considered and evaluated among ourselves in mutual charity, mercy, and kindness. After the removal and correction of things that either side has understood differently, these matters may be settled and brought back to one simple truth and Christian concord. Then we may embrace and maintain the future of one pure and true religion under one Christ, doing battle under him, living in unity and concord in the one Christian church. We, the undersigned elector and princes, have been called to this gathering, along with other electors, princes, and estates, in obedient compliance with the imperial mandate. Therefore, we have promptly come to Augsburg. We do not mean to boast when we say this, but we were among the first to be here. At the very beginning of the meeting in Augsburg, your Imperial Majesty made a proposal to the electors, princes, and other estates in the empire. Among other things, you asked that the several estates of the empire, on the strength of the imperial edict, should submit their explanations, opinions, and judgments in German and Latin. On the following Wednesday, we informed your Imperial Majesty that, after due deliberation, we would present the articles of our confession in 1 week. Therefore, concerning this religious matter, we offer this confession. It is ours and our preachers. It shows from the Holy Scriptures and God's pure word what has been, up to this time, presented in our lands, dukedoms, dominions, and cities, and taught in our churches. In keeping with your edict, the other electors, princes, and estates of the empire may present similar writings in Latin and German, giving their opinions in this religious matter. We and those princes previously mentioned are prepared to discuss in a friendly manner all possible ways and means by which we may come together. We will do this in the presence of your Imperial Majesty, our most clement Lord. In this way, dissensions may be put away without offensive conflict. This can be done honorably with God's help, so that we may be brought back to agreement and concord. As your edict shows, we are all under one Christ and do battle under him. We ought to confess the one Christ and do everything according to God's truth, with the most fervent prayers. This is what we ask of God. However, regarding the rest of the electors, princes, and estates who form the other side, no progress may be made, nor any result achieved by this treatment of religious matters, as your Imperial Majesty has wisely determined that it should be dealt with and treated by mutual presentation of writings and calm conferring together among ourselves. We will at least leave you with a clear testimony. We are not holding back from anything that could bring about Christian concord, such as could be effected with God and a good conscience. Your Imperial Majesty and the other electors and estates of the empire, and all moved by sincere love and zeal for religion, who will give an impartial hearing to this matter, please graciously offer to take notice of this and to understand this from our confession. Your Imperial Majesty has, not once, but often, graciously pointed something out to the electors, princes, and estates of the empire. At the meeting of Speyer in 1526, according to the form of your imperial instruction and commission, this point was given and prescribed. Your Imperial Majesty caused it to be stated and publicly proclaimed that your Majesty, in dealing with this religious matter, for certain reasons that were alleged in your Majesty's name, was not willing to decide and could not determine anything, but that your Majesty would diligently use your Majesty's office with the Roman Pontiff for the convening of a general council. The same matter was publicly set forth at greater length a year ago at the last meeting of the Empire at Speyer. There, your Imperial Majesty, through His Highness Ferdinand, King of Bohemia and Hungary, our friend and clement Lord, as well as through the orator and imperial commissioners, caused the following to be submitted among other things. Concerning the calling of a council, your Imperial Majesty had taken notice of and has pondered the resolution of A, your Majesty's representative in the empire, and of B, the president and imperial councilors, and C, the legates from the other estates convened at Ratisbon. Your Imperial Majesty also judged that it was helpful to convene a council. Your Imperial Majesty did not doubt that the Roman Pontiff could be persuaded to hold a general council. For the matters between your Imperial Majesty and the Roman Pontiff were nearing agreement and Christian reconciliation. Your Imperial Majesty himself pointed out that he would work to secure the said Chief Pontiff's consent for convening a general council, together with your Imperial Majesty, to be announced as soon as possible by letters that were to be sent out. Therefore, if the outcome should be that the differences between us and the other parties in this religious matter should not be settled with friendliness and charity, then here, before your Imperial Majesty, we obediently offer, in addition to what we have already done, to appear and defend our cause in such a general, free Christian council. There has always been harmonious action and agreement among the electors, princes, and other estates to hold a council in all the imperial meetings held during your majesty's reign. Even before this time, we have appealed this great and grave matter to the assembly of this general council and to your imperial majesty in an appropriate manner. We will stand by this appeal, both to your imperial majesty and to a council. We have no intention to abandon our appeal with this or any other document. This would not be possible unless the matter between us and the other side is settled with friendliness and charity, resolved and brought to Christian harmony according to the latest imperial citation. In regard to this appeal, we solemnly and publicly testify here. And therein we lead into the chief articles of the faith according to the Augsburg Confession. It's going to be a ride, my friends. We got a lot to go through once we finally get through this. And it is, again, kind of like drinking from a fire hose. I need to get some fire hose themed decorations in here in addition to obviously the Christian decor. But in any case, that is what I have for you this week. I pray that this has been edifying for you as we start our march through the Augsburg Confession. Hopefully you have a little more understanding of what actually led up to it. If you had no idea what the Augsburg Confession is, hopefully now you're starting to get an idea of what it is. And there's no shame in that, by the way, because very few people really know a lot about this stuff. But as always, that is the purpose of this podcast. In any case, that is what I got for you. Leave any comments and questions that you have down in the comments section, or feel free to email them to me. Certainly feel free and encouraged to send this out as far as you want. This has been Fire Hose. We're shutting it down. Now, folks, if you don't have a church home, first and foremost, I would suggest highly that you check out the LCMS churches in your area. I can almost guarantee you that there will be plenty of options for you. If, however, you are here in the Milwaukee Metro, especially in the Wauwatosa area, feel free to join us. We've got services on Saturday night at 4:30. We've got 2 services on Sunday morning, one at 9 and one at 10:30. Whichever one you go to, you will hear Christ crucified and resurrected for you. Now, until the time that we see each other again, keep the faith, and I hope to see you in church.